Ever think about how family dynamics change after a separation? Especially between parents and their kids, even when the kids are adults.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to dive into a recent study that was published in the Journal of Marriage and Family.
Oh, okay.
This study looks at Italian families where the parents split up when the kids were young.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is. And we're going to look at how mothers and fathers stay connected or don't stay connected with their children.
Okay.
One of the really interesting things that this study found is that dads, especially dads with daughters, have a much harder time staying connected after a separation.
Wow. Even in today's world with all the ways to stay in touch.
Yeah, like you think with texting and video calls and all that stuff,
Right,
it'd
right.
be easier than ever.
Exactly.
But this study, they surveyed over 24,000 households in Italy, and they focused on adult children between 30 and 55 years old. And it paints a very different picture.
Hmm. So what did they find?
Well, tell us. Tell us.
Well, the study found that separated fathers were 29 percentage points less likely than mothers to have, frequent face-to-face contact with their daughters.
Whoa, 29 percentage points. That's huge.
It is.
Why? Why is there such a gap? Especially when it comes to daughters.
Well, that's the big question. The study points to a couple of things. First, it seems like the child's age at the time of the separation really plays a key role, particularly for daughters.
Uh-huh.
And the gender gap in contact is even bigger when the separation happens during early childhood.
Hmm.
So it seems like those early years are crucial for establishing a strong father-daughter bond.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, early childhood is such a formative time,
Right.
and having that consistent presence from both parents, it can really shape a child's sense of security and where they belong.
Absolutely. And the study also brings up something called the accumulation hypothesis.
Okay.
And basically it says that when face-to-face contact is limited, it just makes it harder to connect through other forms of communication as well.
Oh, so it's like if you don't see each other very often, it's harder to talk on the phone or text.
Exactly. It
So-
kind of creates this ripple effect.
Huh.
And it can be hard to stay connected when you're not seeing each other.
So it's like trying to build a house, but on shaky ground.
Yes.
You need that solid foundation.
You need that in-person interaction to really foster a strong, lasting connection.
Okay.
Right.
This study made me think about a friend of mine. Her daughter was really young when she and her husband split up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And she's been raising her daughter pretty much on her own.
Wow.
I mean, her ex sees their daughter,
Yeah.
but it's just different,
Yeah.
It's not as consistent.
Right.
And I don't know, it just doesn't seem as emotionally, I don't know, intense maybe.
Yeah.
So I was reading this and I was thinking, is this like a pattern?
Right.
Is this happening in families all over?
Yeah, it's a good observation. I mean, it really gets to the heart of this research. These findings have some pretty big implications, and not just for families in Italy.
Okay.
It makes us think about families all over the world. How does separation affect families, and how can we, support both fathers and daughters going through this?
This is a really good point. So, what are the implications? What does this research tell us about how families are changing?
Well, one of the biggest things is the impact on fathers and daughters. I mean, daughters might miss out on their dad's support and guidance,
Yeah.
especially, when they're teenagers or young adults.
Right.
And for fathers, it can be really tough,
Yeah.
feeling disconnected from their kids.
And what about custody arrangements?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, traditionally, mothers have been favored in custody battles.
Mm-hmm.
Could this research change things? I mean, how do we make sure both parents have a chance to have a real relationship with their kids?
It's something we need to think about for sure. I mean, this research shows that maybe we need to look at our laws, Yeah.
And whether they're actually making it harder for fathers to stay involved.
It's interesting, though, because even though the study found a big difference in face-to-face contact, it also said that people still use technology to stay in touch.
Right.
So it's not like they're not talking at all.
Exactly. It's just that digital communication doesn't completely close the gap.
Okay, so it's a tool, but not a perfect one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that makes me wonder, how can we use these tools better?
Yeah.
I mean, could we encourage more video calls instead of texting?
Hmm.
Or find ways to use social media to really share experiences?
That's interesting. What surprised you the most about this study?
Honestly, the size of the gender gap.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy considering how easy it is to stay in touch these days.
Right.
It really shows how important those early years are,
Yeah.
for building that father-daughter relationship.
Yeah. This study didn't really go into the reasons behind this gender gap,
Uh-huh.
but it did say that the kid's age when the parents split up is important.
Right. It would be interesting to see how being separated from your dad affects daughters differently at different ages.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, think about a little girl, like 5 years old, when her parents split up.
Yeah.
That could really affect how she sees the world,
Right.
her sense of security, her relationships. It would be different for a teenager.
Okay.
They probably have more ways to cope with it.
Before we move on, we should talk about the limitations of this study,
Oh, yeah, good point.
because every study has limitations.
Right,
I mean, the researchers themselves said that they focused on older parents.
right.
So they may not be as comfortable with, like, texting and video calls and all that stuff.
Yeah, younger parents might use technology differently.
Exactly. And they only looked at one point in time.
Right,
So we don't know how these relationships change over time.
good point.
Maybe some of these dads do reconnect with their daughters later on.
Yeah, or maybe other things happen that we just don't know about. But even though this study has limitations, I think it's a really good starting point. It
yeah.
gets us talking about how families are changing.
Right?
And it challenges us to think about our own assumptions
Okay.
about what it means to be a father or a daughter in today's world.
It really makes you think, like what happens to these families years down the road?
It does. It reminds us that we're not just talking about numbers here,
Right.
This is about real families, real people dealing with some tough stuff.
Absolutely. This whole study, it just hit home for me.
Yeah.
It's like families are always changing.
Yeah.
And if we want to build good relationships that last, we got to understand what's going on.
I agree. And as we wrap up today, I keep thinking about one question.
Oh, yeah.
We talked about how hard it is for some fathers to stay connected to their daughters.
Right.
So how does that change how you think about family?
That's a really good question. I mean, maybe it makes you want to reach out to like a dad in your life who's struggling, or maybe it makes you think about the challenges families face, when they're going through a separation.
Exactly. Whatever it is, I hope this deep dive, helped people understand families a little better
Yeah.
and the importance of supporting each other.
Absolutely. This has been so interesting. I bet our listeners learned a lot today.
Until next time, keep thinking about these things,
Yeah.
and never stop exploring how we connect with each other.